Stephen here, smoking my clay church warden. Cult Blood Red Moon. Drinking Old Speckled Hen. Cheers. Happy Sunday evening. And what I'm listening to is the next one in my Lives album series, and this is one that really did show my break away from the old head banging hard rock of my early youth and the general drift towards West Coast folk rock, whatever. And it is, of course, get my hand out of the way, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, 4-Way Street. I've even still got the poster in there, never taken it out. I became a real fan of Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, especially with Deja Vu. Well, I seem to recall this album didn't get good reviews at the time, and apparently at the time these concerts were recorded, the band were hardly talking to each other. It's good stuff. And what I'm here tonight is to invite you to listen to a tale of yore. Or a tale of mine. So we're, picture this. The year is 1974. And a young Beerbeard, smooth of chin, hirsute of scalp, is unemployed. I just jacked in my first job that I'd had after leaving school, which was working for a builder. And I was only unemployed for a short amount of time. I was living in Bedford at the time, about 40 miles north of London. And I saw an advert in the local paper for unskilled labour, which was me, to work for the Anglian Water Authority. Now, those of you that don't know, Anglia is an area of central eastern England. It mainly comprises the counties of Norfolk and Suffolk, but extends westward into Cambridgeshire and wherever. And it gets its name because it was the ancient kingdom of Anglia, or East Anglia, which in turn gets its name from the Germanic tribe that settled there in the early Middle Ages after the Romans had departed. They were the Angles from northern Germany. And here's another fun fact. They eventually gave the country of my birth its name, because it was the land of the Angles, which became Angleland, which in Old English became Engleland, which eventually became England. So there we are. That's how we get to England, through the courtesy of the Angles. Cheers. Anyway, I better move on swiftly because I'm already up to quite a long time. This might be a long one. And I went to work for the Anglian Water Authority, but it wasn't the domestic water supply business, it was the Great Ouse River division of the Anglian Water Authority. The Great Ouse being a river that flows through Cambridgeshire and up to the Wash and eventually into the North Sea. There are several rivers called the Ouse. It's not to be confused with the Ouse that flows through Yorkshire. There are several rivers called the Ouse in England, and apparently it comes from Celtic or pre-Celtic word for slow moving water, or just water. ooze. There you go. There's water. It's the ooze. And I went to work for the Great Ouse River Division. And our job was to keep the waterways navigable and clear. The canals, the rivers. So there was stuff involved like dredging, you know, built up silt, keeping the locks working, keeping bridges clear of obstructions like fallen trees, and which would block up the archways under bridges, old bridges, which would then allow collection of certain unpleasant articles to build up underneath, and we'd have to go in there and clear it out. And I've been working there a few months, and then I was, because I started there about April of 1974, when I was paired up with this chap who was sort of slightly senior position to me because he was skilled, if you like. And he drove this great big digger, a huge thing. It wasn't on Caterpillar tracks, it was on wheels, so we could take it on the road, but it was massive. Had a big extending articulated arm and a bucket on the end. And I was like, he was the skilled man driving the digger, and I was what was called his banksman. Basically general dog spotting, doing whatever needs to be done to keep his machine going. And when I was paired up with him, we were then assigned this job, a new job to me. And he would drive this digger to a predetermined place on one of the rivers, because it wasn't just the Great Ouse, it was all the waterways. And I'd follow behind in the van with the lights flashing, because it was very, very slow moving. And we'd get there and he'd park up his digger, and then the next thing was to go back to the depot, where I would get the Land Rover, a real old-fashioned Land Rover, basically like a metal box on wheels, could go anywhere. And I had a trailer on the back, and on the trailer was my boat. And I would take this back to where he parked his digger on the riverbank, and our first job was to hammer a stake into the bank just slightly downriver of his machine, and then we'd get the boat, I'd lower the boat down to the river with the trailer, and then I'd go across diagonally upstream from his machine and hammer another stake in and attach a rope between the two stakes. And then the next job was to tie wooden fence posts, round sort of natural wooden fence posts, not really dense things, tie them along the rope. And this served two purposes. One, it kept the rope floating on the top, and two, because otherwise the rope would have got saturated and dipped slightly below the surface. And two, it formed a more substantial barrier than just the rope itself. Now this boat of mine was like an old British racing green motorboat, metal, completely metal hull, probably welded metal hull, with a slatted wooden deck inside it, very low down. And it had an inboard motor, and I'd have to get it started every morning with the old, like a lawnmower, you know, with the old flywheel and rope, and get the thing going. And then once it was going, I sat just behind the motor and a great big wheel, and I sat there, and that obviously operated the rudder behind. I hope some of this is interesting you. But the thing that actually made the boat stand out was what went on up the front half. The sharp end, as they call it in the Navy. And there, in repose, as it were, when it wasn't in operation, was a set of blades. And there was a long one pointing back towards me, and then another one crossing the T, as it were. Big serrated blades. So I should have smoked a pipe I could clench. But it had two serrated blades, big teeth on it. And the idea was I would chug up the river, and when I got to the appropriate point, I would stop the engine, go forward, and lift these up. So it was like an inverted capital T at the front of the boat, and then I'll use a handle to lower them in, and then they would be driven by the same motor that was driving the boat itself. And when I engaged that, the blades would operate against each other. And then I'd go through all the waterweed and the sedge and the reeds and all the growth that had built up in the river and cut it well below the surface of the water. And I also had manual tools for when I couldn't get right in close to the bank. I had like a rush hook, which was a big sickle on a long pole to cut the stuff closest into the bank. And as I chugged up the river in my little boat, I'd cut through all this weed, and of course it would float up to the surface once cut and flow down river until it reached the rope and fence posts dam that we built across. And because of the way we'd done it diagonally down to a point, the apex of a triangle as it were, where the digger was, all the weed would naturally flow in there with the force of the water. And when a substantial quantity had built up, my oppo would get in his digger and hoof it all out and dump it on the bank in a great big pile where it would rot down, and presumably eventually, if there are any local farmers nearby, they'd dig it into their soil. And that was how I spent my first summer working for the Anglian Water Authority. Of course, because he didn't, I got on very well with him. John, his name was. You know, he had a while to wait on most places for a substantial supply to build up, so he'd come in the boat with me. And we'd chug up and down the water together like Ratty and Mole. God, this is gurgling a lot. But it was a lovely little way to make a living, a gentle way to make a living. We did the smaller waterways. On the bigger ones, they had very, very big boats. But I really enjoyed it. Used to see so much wildlife as well, especially water voles, or water rats as they're known. Of course, they're not rats. Which eventually, this was back in the 70s, there were loads of them. You'd always see them with their heads just peeking above the water as they were going across from one bank to the other. And in England they eventually became an endangered species because of mink farms. Mink would escape from the farms and feast on the water voles. Now I was going to go on and tell another story, but I'm realising I'm up to 15 minutes. And I think it's probably trying anyone's patience to listen to me rattle on about my career on the river. If you would like to hear another story, hostage to fortune, about my time on the riverboard. I could tell it now, but you know, 16 minutes, it's too much. So I better call it a halt. But I'm happy to tell it if anyone would be interested in hearing. I never saw Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young live, although I went on to become... Neil Young was probably my favourite solo artist of all time after Tom Waits. I've got just about everything Neil Young has ever recorded. Never seen him play live. Many years later I saw Crosby, Stills and Nash at the Albert Hall, and they were very good. And then I also saw Stephen Stills play live, but that's another one of my live ones coming much later on down in the series. A great artist. Never achieved the recognition that Neil Young did, I don't think, but he was an incredible artist. Yeah, I think second only to Neil Young and being the most talented out of the four. Eddie Road up. I better go now because there's some nails and screws in this wood I've put on, and I think we've got some explosions coming up. I hope you've been able to hear the gurgling from this, because it really is. And you can see the moisture coming through. You probably also see me just tipping a load of ash onto my carpet. I never learn. Any road up. Cheers. Happy Sunday evening. Long life, happiness. Have a great week, all of you. I hope you're warmer than I am. But, you know, with a fire, a beer and a pipe. God. I'm getting a bit worried. I'm going to move away before I get hit by any shrapnel. Ta-da all. If you've stayed with me this long, good on you. Ta-da.